An American aircraft carrier is often called a floating city, carrying more than 5,000 sailors and over 70 aircraft. But could Iran actually destroy one of these giants? The answer is far more complicated than most people think. At first glance, the Strait of Hormuz looks almost insignificant, a narrow ribbon of water squeezed between Iran and Oman, barely noticeable on a world map. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. Every sunrise, hundreds of ships carrying the fuel that powers cities, industries, and entire nations pass through this single corridor. It is one of the few places on Earth where geography alone has the power to reshape the global economy. Military planners don't simply see a waterway here. They see a pressure point capable of influencing the balance of power across continents. That is why aircraft carriers patrol these waters. Surveillance aircraft circle overhead, and intelligence agencies monitor every unusual movement. In this region, even a routine naval exercise can send oil markets into panic. For decades, the United States has quietly built a framework of contingency plans for a single, terrifying possibility: direct war with Iran. These are not the kind of plans discussed in press conferences. They live inside classified briefings, war-gamed inside simulation centers, and rehearsed during naval exercises that rarely make headlines. Officially, Washington insists it doesn't seek conflict. Unofficially, every branch of the American military maintains detailed blueprints for what such a war would look like, from the opening missile strikes to the final diplomatic aftermath. Understanding these plans means understanding something larger: the strange, fragile balance that has kept this region from exploding into full-scale war for more than 40 years. To understand why this standoff exists at all, you have to go back to 1979. That year, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the American-backed Shah and replaced decades of cooperation with open hostility. The seizure of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and the 444 days that followed shattered any illusion that the two nations could return to their old alliance. From that moment forward, Iran positioned itself as a regional power willing to defy Washington directly, while the United States began treating the Persian Gulf as a permanent zone of strategic concern. Every American administration since has inherited this tension, adjusting the pressure but never removing it entirely. By the 1980s, that hostility had already turned violent. During the Iran-Iraq War, the United States quietly protected oil tankers under Operation Earnest Will, and tensions eventually spilled into direct combat. In 1988, the U.S. Navy and Iranian forces clashed in Operation Praying Mantis, the largest surface naval battle fought by the American Navy since World War II. Iranian gunboats and missile platforms were destroyed within hours. It was a brief, brutal reminder that when confrontation does happen in these waters, it happens fast, and it happens with overwhelming firepower on one side of the equation. That imbalance in raw firepower still exists today, but Iran has spent decades studying it and adapting around it. Tehran knows it cannot match American naval power ship for ship. Instead, it has built what analysts call an asymmetric strategy, a way of making a much weaker military dangerous through unconventional means. Fast attack boats swarm in numbers too large to intercept efficiently. Anti-ship missiles are hidden along the coastline, camouflaged inside caves and mobile launchers. Naval mines are sown quietly across shipping lanes. None of these weapons could defeat the U.S. Navy in open battle. But that was never the goal. The goal is to make any American intervention costly enough that Washington hesitates before committing to it. This is where the real military analysis begins, because the central question people keep asking, could Iran actually sink a U.S. aircraft carrier, misses the more important issue entirely. Modern carriers don't sail alone. Each one travels inside a strike group, layered with destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and airborne early warning aircraft. These layers exist specifically to intercept incoming threats long before they reach the carrier itself. Iran's arsenal includes anti-ship ballistic missiles like the Khalij Fars and cruise missiles based on Chinese and Soviet designs, along with a growing fleet of exploding drone boats. On paper, these weapons look alarming. In practice, they would have to break through multiple defensive rings, radar tracking, electronic jamming, and interceptor missiles, all functioning perfectly in sequence under combat conditions. That doesn't mean the threat is imaginary. It means the danger isn't a single knockout blow. It's a war of attrition fought in narrow waters where American ships have less room to maneuver than almost anywhere else on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, with shipping lanes even tighter than that. In open ocean, a carrier group has space and time to detect and react. Inside the Gulf, that space disappears. A single successful mine strike, a lucky missile hit on a support ship, or a swarm attack overwhelming point defense systems could inflict serious damage and serious American casualties, even without sinking a carrier outright. For military planners, that scenario, not the destruction of a supercarrier, is the true nightmare. History offers a chilling preview of how fragile these waters can become. In 1988, the USS Samuel B struck an Iranian naval mine, tearing a hole in its hull and injuring 10 sailors. The ship survived barely, and the incident triggered Operation Praying Mantis in retaliation. It proved that even a single low-cost mine could cripple a warship worth hundreds of millions of dollars. More recently, in 2019, a series of mysterious limpet mine attacks damaged oil tankers near the strait. Attacks that Washington attributed to Iranian forces, though Tehran denied involvement. These events reveal Iran's true strength. Not open confrontation, but quiet, deniable disruption that creates fear without ever crossing the line into full declared war. So what would an actual American war plan against Iran look like? Based on years of leaked assessments, war games, and statements from former defense officials, the opening phase would almost certainly begin in the air, not on the water. Stealth bombers and cruise missiles would target air defense systems, command centers, and known missile storage sites within the first hours. The objective would be simple in theory and enormously difficult in execution: blind Iran before it can coordinate a response. Naval forces would move to secure the strait itself, escorting tankers and clearing mines, while special operations units would work to neutralize fast attack boat bases along the coastline. It would be, by every available projection, one of the most complex military operations attempted in decades. But even the most successful opening strike wouldn't guarantee a short war. Iran's mountainous terrain hides an enormous underground missile infrastructure, tunnels and bunkers built specifically to survive an initial bombardment. Intelligence assessments suggest Iran maintains one of the largest ballistic missile arsenals in the Middle East, much of it dispersed and hardened against airstrikes. That means a war wouldn't end with a single decisive strike. It would likely stretch into a prolonged campaign of strikes, retaliation, and counterstrikes, dragging in regional proxies and testing the patience of a global economy already balanced on a knife's edge. If this conflict actually unfolded, the global consequences would arrive almost instantly, long before the first missile even reaches its target. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. Any serious disruption, whether from mines, missile strikes, or simply insurance companies refusing to cover tankers in a war zone, would send energy prices soaring within hours. Asian economies dependent on Gulf oil would face immediate shocks. European markets, already strained by previous energy crises, would absorb another blow. And the United States, despite its own domestic oil production, would not be insulated from a worldwide price surge. This is why, even decades later, this strip of water remains one of the most closely watched flashpoints on the entire planet. Beyond economics, the political fallout would be just as unpredictable. A war with Iran wouldn't stay contained to one country. Iranian-backed groups across the region, from Lebanon to Iraq to Yemen, could be activated as pressure points against American interests and allies. Gulf states hosting U.S. military bases would suddenly find themselves inside the blast radius of a conflict they didn't start. Russia and China, both maintaining economic and military ties with Tehran, would face pressure to respond diplomatically, if not materially. What begins as a narrow military engagement in one strait could, within days, evolve into a crisis pulling in half the globe. And that's precisely why, despite decades of hostility, open war has never actually happened. Both sides understand the cost. Washington knows a war in the Gulf risks global economic catastrophe and American casualties on a scale rarely seen since Vietnam. Tehran knows a direct confrontation with the most powerful military on Earth could shatter its government entirely. So instead, both nations remain locked in a strange, exhausting equilibrium. Sanctions instead of invasions, proxy skirmishes instead of open battles, and secret war plans that exist purely to deter the war they were designed to fight. Perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all. The most dangerous plans aren't always the ones meant to be executed. Sometimes, the plan itself, sitting quietly in a classified folder, rehearsed in war games no one will ever see, is the very thing keeping the peace. The question isn't really whether America could defeat Iran in open war. It's whether either side can afford